Hello, this is Marjorie Wildcraft, and today I really have the pleasure of spending time with master herbalist Doug Simons. And Doug has many talents and abilities. We're going to dive into something that's a little bit off of herbalism, but they're all connected. Many times over the years, you've written in with comments, you've seen me walking around barefoot, and I've had so many people so concerned. Marjorie, please put some shoes on. We're worried about you. Did you cut yourself? And I've been walking around barefoot for about a decade. I really like it. I haven't figured out all the nuances, but Doug's been barefoot for 30 years?
Yeah, 30 plus anyway, yeah.
So we wanted to have a conversation about that, and then also a little bit about shoes. If you are going to be a barefooter, then wearing shoes suddenly becomes a whole nother world. So I know, Doug, I like to go barefoot. Just I have a much deeper connection to the land, and I know almost every second of the day when I'm walking around on my farm, the condition of the soil, how dry it is, how moist it is, what species are growing there, and there's just a whole, like, I have an intimacy with my property, and that's
right,
one
that
of the
comes
reasons
through your feet.
that comes right up through my feet. There's like a whole sense organ down there constantly giving me feedback.
Right.
And so I'm curious, for you, going barefoot, how did you get started, and why do you do it, or why would you recommend people to do it?
Yeah, well, I go barefoot because I like it.
Yeah.
And I like it for physical reasons in my body. Those are the two reasons. I like it because I like that connection. I like to feel the earth under my feet. I like the information, like you're discussing, that comes through there. It slows me down. I'm more aware of where my body is and where I'm moving. I tend not to step on things that I don't want to step on, whether it's something that would injure me or equally as much plants and things that I'd prefer not to crush under my feet.
I think that slowing down bit might be one reason that a lot of people don't want to go barefoot, because you do become much more careful.
Yeah, it's true. And of course, if your feet are very accustomed to shoes, then you get really slowed down going barefoot. But the feet really adjust to going barefoot fairly quickly, at least the initial part, you know. And so that connection I really appreciate. I love being barefoot. I don't tend to go barefoot in town because I don't like to step on the potential things that are there, like glass, gum, needles, who knows, right?
Linoleum floors,
yeah.
You know, a gas station or a public bathroom. Like,
right.
You don't want to be barefoot there.
So I put something on for those conditions, and we'll talk about what we like and why.
Yeah.
I also have feet that were not really well designed for modern shoes. It always took my mom a lot of time to find me a pair of shoes that were correct, and that kind of pushed me toward barefoot as well. But one of the things that I learned and figured out about the health and shoes that I think is very important is I had an injury or a condition. I'm not really even sure where it came from, but it was in my hip. And boy, nobody could figure it out. None of the chiropractors and acupuncturists. It was difficult for me. I would get pain when I walked. And the only thing that fixed it was going barefoot. And I since really begin to understand that a lot of joint pain and back pain is caused by shoes. And if some of these viewers may be experiencing a difficulty in sorting that out, I mean, there's a lot of factors that affect that, including diet and the condition of the liver, inflammation, that we ideally would address. And if it persists after that, it's always in the shoes. And even if you're not able to address that to your satisfaction, shoes can really affect it. So there's kind of a couple levels. Barefoot is really the best. Yet shoe choice can make a huge difference, and
people often ask me, when do I wear shoes, and I found, going into town, right. Or giving a public, demonstration. I don't want people focusing on my feet. I want them to hear my message, so I wear shoes for that. And I've also found when I'm low energy, or I'm emotionally upset or disturbed, or sometimes it's for women when we're menstruating, we're just really sensitive. And I find like, yeah, I want to wear some shoes. I just want to protect my feet and go and not have to have that be a part of what I'm doing, So I want to wear some shoes. And that actually brings us up to the topic, though, is when you're a barefooter and you start to go back into shoes, it gets very clunky, and suddenly you start to realize that shoes really aren't all those issues you were talking about. I think we've got an example of a pair here where, all of a sudden this thick heel and all of this protection, it actually starts to get in the way of walking.
Right.
So,
and yeah, and they can be really, really damaging or perpetuating to problems that we have in our body. Back problems and joint problems really respond to changing the kinds of shoes we wear.
Yeah.
And there's a number of things that can happen with a pair of shoes. You'll notice people who wear shoes a lot often will have folded over toes, or really a formed condition of their toes. Their toes aren't any longer flat and spread out, and that's important. Another aspect that happens with a shoe like this, and this was something that I discovered years ago, these kind of shoes with this heavy cushioning and so-called arch support and protection, it sends the shock back into the body. And I work, because I work with so many people who come to me with injuries and in need of help, I get a lot of runners, and they can't run anymore. And one of the first things I teach them is this. It's the shoes, because, this was thought to be a great idea, that the cushioning would make your experience walking and running better, but it doesn't, because the shock re-enters the body. And then I remember reading that book that's called Born to Run.
Yeah, Chris McDougall.
They showed in actual measuring of shock in a machine that when you wore a pair of shoes that had this kind of padding and thickness, they showed in the machine that the reading of the shock, it goes back into the body. And the other aspect that I think would be interesting to people that I learned a long time ago, I actually learned it from my son when he was a small boy. We think that those boots that offer so-called ankle support, right? We put it here so that we don't twist our ankles. That's really the best way to twist your ankle. When our feet have nothing on them, you can really twist your ankle. I mean, just lay it over and nothing happens. It's part of its design. It can handle that. But when there's something changing that ability to lay over, that's when you'll twist your ankle. And
so people who wear those boots are more likely to get a twisted ankle.
Yes,
than
and
somebody
then they'll have
shoes.
sore ankles. It happened to me when I was a kid, and for years, when I was maybe 14, 15 years old, I'd wrap my ankle every day with an ace bandage and wear my boots because I had this weak ankle. And I grew out of that by stopping wearing that stuff. And my son, who would always go barefoot, when he'd go visit his grandparents, he'd wear shoes. And he said, yeah, Doug, that's the best way to twist your ankle, because it stops the movement, and then something in your ankle gets extended or stretched or even torn.
Oh, because of the shape it's keeping it in.
And we don't get to go from barefoot or from heavy shoes and misformed feet to barefoot like that. It's a process that you have to toughen up your feet, and it takes some time. So these are the reasons, some of the reasons that I prefer to go barefoot. And then, you know, part of our discussion is how to choose a shoe that might be effective.
Yeah.
Well-
Well, that's, you know, so when I started saying, well, I think I need to wear some shoes, and, you know, it's not like people for centuries have worn shoes and for thousands of years. And you were saying the huaraches tres puntos? Is
Yeah,
this the-
huaraches de tres puntos.
Okay,
Yeah.
my Spanish, I'm working on it.
Right.
But that's actually a shoe that's been around forever,
Mhm.
and people have been making those for forever. So I started to try and make some, and I've had
Right.
some disasters in my construction attempts, and I'm really glad I got Doug here because he's going to show me the right way to make them.
Yeah.
But here's my first pair, and these were really good. They've been really good. One problem with them, though, is that the knot is not countersunk. So this knot, every few months, depending on the usage, sometimes more often, will break, and then I have this. And so I'd have to redo it. And so I realized, wow, having that knot countersunk is really important. Like, I really need to do something with that.
Right, which you can't do on a material like this.
It's too thin.
Right.
Right.
Or I don't know a technique anyway. And, you know, and as a selection for shoes, what I've learned is that you want a thin, hard sole. You don't want a gushy sole. So if you were to go into a store to attempt to buy a pair of shoes, that's your criteria. You don't want arch support, and you don't want thick soles. So you try to find a shoe that has a very thin, hard sole, and that helps hugely. This sandal, and as you mentioned, this is a sandal called a 3-point sandal, huaraches de tres puntos. So 3 points where the tie is attached to the sole, right? So this is an ancient design. It used to be made out of yucca with some type of cordage, right? I've seen them made out of rawhide, which works until they get wet. But obviously, people found that these more durable materials, and that's all this is a same design in a more durable material. And this is all over the world. This isn't just a Mexican or Tarahumara who this exact design is from the Tarahumara people. They're in Vietnam. They're all over, and I've seen children in Mexico when the sand is really hot go to the trash can and get a chunk of cardboard and cut it out the size of their foot and get some string of any kind that happens to be there, like baler twine. They put holes in that cardboard, and then they got a disposable pair of sandals that they can walk, jog, almost run and tear it up, but not quite because the cardboard isn't strong enough. But they can cruise across stickers or very hot sand, you know. So it's an instant sandal, and all these people who grew up in that kind of world, they know how to make them. And this particular sandal is a design that I got from the Tarahumara people, and those guys are the world-class runners, right? They cruise, and I remember a story that I was told of these runners doing one of those marathons, and it was in I think it was in Leadville, Colorado, right? The high mountain long marathon, so you're dealing with altitude
100 miles, yeah.
Yeah, right. And they brought these guys in, and they like happily offered them these awesome brand new running shoes, these $100 running shoes, and they're like, nah, take us to the dump, you know. and they they whip out a pair of these, and you can run forever in these without those conditions happening, ankle twisting, and especially the shock going back in. So they've really shown their effectiveness. And we're gonna go ahead and make a pair, because Marjorie needs a pair. We'll also talk some more about her problem shoes that she's created. But there's some tricks. You know, you probably have seen other videos or demonstrations on making these shoes, but I learned these shoes from the Tarahumara, and there's a few tricks that make them a lot better. And one of the other aspects of a shoe in general, like this kind of shoe, is they're never the same length as our foot. They're a good chunk, sometimes as much as an inch longer than our foot. That makes you perpetually clumsy. Even if you've been walking in shoes for 80 years, you're 80 years old, there's a clumsiness that comes with having a shoe on your foot that's so much longer than your body's designed to walk with, right? The knowledge, the body knowledge of how big your foot is always modified. So you may not get good at the compromise, but if you notice, people with shoes always have a stumbly nature, and you get that length down to the same size as the foot, and now the system that your body is, you've got the right thing, and you get much more ability to walk comfortably,
Move properly.
Yeah. So let's have a look at these guys, and what I've noticed in these is that they're improperly cut. They're not shaped to your foot correctly.
So we'll stop for just a second. These are another pair I made. This is the second pair that I made, and I thought, wow, so I really want to countersink that knot. So this time I got some, this is a lawnmower tire, and that way I could countersink this so that I wouldn't have that abrade out and not have to keep retiring it all the time. But
right, which is perfect. And these have a countersunk thing too, to keep the leather that I use to tie them on with from breaking all the time. And this countersunk under here as well. So that's really good on these. And the material is okay, probably, if a person likes the tread. And we can probably recut these to fit your feet better, and replace where the holes are a little, and probably save these shoes.
okay.
These particular ones, and you questioned me about this, these are made from the sidewall of an automobile tire, or actually a bigger, maybe an SUV or something. You don't really want a truck tire because they start getting thicker and thicker. And there's no real tread at all on these.
Well, that was my question for you. I mean, the Tarahumara, the Copper Canyons, they're known for these treacherous, rocky trails.
Yeah, right.
You know,
And
don't they need tread?
right, and some of the Tarahumaras that I've observed, they do use the tread side, especially the kids. You know, they like to make wild, thick treaded tires. But most of them, if by my observation, were these sidewalls. And what I've learned, because, you know, I'm barefoot probably 95% of the time, right? When I'm not in town. So in town, you know, which is 5% of my life, that 5% I have something on, usually these, right? There's another 5% when I'm outside that I might want a sandal on. That comes from being tired and in a hurry, or sometimes when we get tired, or our liver is a little off, our feet are more sensitive. You know, there's a few times. I tend to walk barefoot in snow and ice. I live in southern New Mexico. There's not consistent snow and ice, but I don't mind walking across snow with bare feet. But there are times, and what I've learned about these is they're slick as can be on pine needles, or sometimes wet ground. But if you're in rough terrain, you don't need tread anyway. The terrain is rough.
Yes, that
and there's
sort of makes sense.
Right, there's no need.
Yeah.
And you know, even my feet can be slick on pine needles, right?
Yeah.
They can get hard and slick and slide. But I found that the tread is not really a necessary thing, and that to me, the way I think, makes lots of sense, because I wasn't born with any tread. You know, so I always go back to that natural. That's a lot of the ways that I discern how things might be the most balanced, as I go with what is the most natural, and then I think it through from that point. So these guys work really well for me in those times, and they're very easy to make. This pair of sandals, you know, these will last me 5 years. They'll last a person who uses them all the time a year, you know, Rubber does wear out just like on a car. I know when I first got my first pair, I was like, wow, I got the pair of shoes for the rest of my life. But they do wear out eventually.
If you'd like to learn how to make your own 3-point sandals, Doug is offering a free, detailed, step-by-step video at the 2016 Homegrown Food Summit.